There are 6.5 billion people in the world, but we all look the same when we lie. Dilated pupils, oblique eyebrows, an upturned lip, the smallest line on your face, the slightest body movement. It all tells a story. It may be human nature to lie, but the truth is written all over your face.
As the intro suggests, this episode of Mr. McAfoose's midterm projects is titled Facial Expression and Its Role in Deceit and in Lie Detection. Originally, I became interested in this topic after watching the Fox Network's television series Lie to Me. The show's main character is based on Dr. Paul Ekman, a notable psychologist and expert on body language and facial expression. In one of Dr. Ekman's scientific papers, he discusses the theories behind deception and lie detection, tracing the start of the study back to Darwin. Darwin states that the movements of expression reveal the thoughts and intentions of others more truly than words, which may be falsified. One of Darwin's theories is what Dr. Ekman refers to as the inhibition hypothesis. This states that if you cannot make an action voluntarily, then you will not be able to prevent it when involuntary processes such as emotion instigate it. In order to determine the accuracy of Darwin's inhibition hypothesis, Dr. Ekman identified which facial actions are difficult to make intentionally. Using the facial action coding system, FACS, that he developed in 1978, some of the muscles that were identified were the orbicularis oris, the depressor labii inferioris, the risorius, and the orbicularis oculi pars lateralis. The movement of these reliable facial muscles signify felt emotions, or as Dr. Ekman refers to them, leakage. Probably the most famous example of real versus fake emotional leakage is conveyed through Duchenne's proposal about how to differentiate a smile of enjoyment from a fake smile. Duchenne electrically stimulated a subject's zygomatic major muscle and compared it to the smile produced when he told the subject a joke. In addition to the zygomatic major muscle, the orbicularis oculi muscle also contracted, proving that the lack of involuntary muscular movement reveals untrue emotion. However, Dr. Ekman is quick to point out that even though this difference is measurable, we must delve further to see if observers can detect the difference in real time. When discussing this point, Dr. Ekman provides his and his colleagues' discovery of micro-expressions. These are micro-displays of a reduced or masked display. They may also be the entire muscular movement associated with a macro-expression, but in a much shorter period of time. Micro-expressions have been found to be very dependable sources of emotional information, and the ability to see and read that information can be taught quickly and then used in real-time scenarios. An extremely notable discovery is the asymmetry in expression. When children were asked to imitate facial movements, the movements produced were asymmetrical, while the spontaneous expressions resulting from real or felt emotions were symmetrical. This important factor was consistent in adults who were told to smile while watching pleasant and unpleasant films. In the end, Dr. Ekman warns that no single source of demeanor is completely trustworthy and resistant to efforts of disguise, nor is there a source that should be disregarded because it is completely untrustworthy. When assessing whether a person is lying, he cautions us about Othello's error. Othello mistook his lover's look of fear as a reaction of a woman caught in betrayal, as opposed to the fear of being disbelieved. It is important to know that emotions do not tell you their cause, and that further questioning must be used to determine the causes of the emotion. Going back to Dr. Ekman's point about real-time detection, a study was conducted to determine the potential role of rapid judgment assessments of verbal and nonverbal cues for deception researchers and lie detection. The most notable outcome of this study was that when observers primarily concentrated on the frequency of verbal and nonverbal cues, they detected lies implicitly and were more accurate than explicit lie detection. The correct classification of truths and lies for this study was 74%. This is an average of the 82% accuracy for detecting truths and 65% accuracy for detecting lies. It is important to note that this is significantly above the level of chance, which is 50%. In another scientific article, whose methodology I will explain in a moment, facial movement was examined to determine what aspects of motion display and change in emotional facial expression. Hiroshi Yamada notes that facial expression categorization does not have to do with recognizing codes of facial muscles, because we can categorize facial expression from simple line drawings which have no anatomical foundation. Vasily proved this in 1978 using Johannesson's point light display experiment. Vasily had human subjects' faces painted black, and white marks were put on the face at random. Observers could judge facial expression easily, suggesting that certain patterns of facial movement provided expressional information independently of information of other cognitive areas. Two experiments were designed to test this possible explanation of facial expression recognition. In the first experiment, 20 male undergraduate students and 16 female junior college students utilized the computer graphic system Schematic Expressions of Emotions, SEE, to produce facial diagrams depicting basic emotions. They each changed the original neutral diagram 6 different times to make basic schematic expressional faces by moving 8 feature points. After this initial deforming phase, the students were presented with one of the 6 categories and the corresponding face they had drawn. If he or she felt it necessary to modify the face, they did so in the same manner as before. These are the 6 faces that were created: happiness, surprise, fear, sadness, anger, and disgust. Each change to a feature point was then averaged with the total amount of change from each student in order to determine a common ground for each schematic facial emotion. At the end of the experiment, the hypothesis was made that people use visual properties such as the curvedness or openness and slantedness of facial elements as information for the classification of facial expression into categories of emotion. This hypothesis was then tested in the second experiment. 72 out of the 216 schematic facial expressions produced from the first experiment were given to 128 female junior college students. The students judged which of the 6 categories each individual schematic face seemed to express. The purpose of the second experiment was to measure the correlational displacement between each expression. These new discoveries have been noted to aid the automatic generation systems of cartoons and movies, but more interestingly could be applied to the computer-aided recognition systems of real faces. This would be useful in lines of work where the truth must be determined, as in law enforcement. In fact, a computerized non-invasive psychological profiling system has been developed exactly for that purpose. Silent Talker is an artificial neural network and computer-based system that collects and analyzes nonverbal cues to classify an overall behavioral or psychological state. It can be adapted to identify different states and will understand particular situations, environments, and applications. The advantage to using such a program is that it can give results in near real time and can learn features of classification and thus classify unseen cases. It is also non-invasive, so it can be used in airports and other places where time and cost is important. It could also include physiological measurements like voice pitch. The Silent Talker measures multiple channels, behaviors at minute levels. ANDs can be trained to classify inputs to its network by showing it sample cases and the desired classifications. The ANDs detects body movement in order to instantly measure the frequency of specific behaviors like eye blinks and sideways head movements. Then, it classifies the cumulative numerical worth which has been previously assigned to each behavior and can provide classification of deceit or truth. 39 adults, of which about half were male and 2/3 of both genders were European, participated in this experiment. They were each given a number and individually entered a room with a table, chair, and a box under the chair. Instructions on the table told them to look inside the box, and if they were an odd number, to take the money that was there. They were instructed that they would be interviewed, but that they were not to reveal if they had taken the money. The questions from the interview were the same for each interview. After the first round of interviews, each individual got another number, even or odd, depending on whether they had already taken the money or not. Then, they went through the process again. For future reference, an unplanned interview refers to the first time a subject was interviewed, and therefore does not know any of the questions he or she will be asked, as opposed to a planned interview, which was when the subject had already been exposed to the series of questions in the interview. 24 channels of data were measured whose theme consisted of face, head movement, eye gaze, eye closure, blushing, and for simplicity, known data, i.e. gender, race, and planning. After identifying the object, like face or eye, and the position of the object, the program consolidates data about the object so it can be used for classification. Normally, the program is exposed to a training set, and then, once a certain predefined criteria is met for the number of correct classifications, a test set is used. This occurs until another predefined percentage of classification accuracy is reached. In conclusion, the silent talker utilizes many different channels so as to provide the more accurate information, as well as operating in near real time, being non-invasive, and also provides profiling. Thanks for listening, and just before you go, here's a quick overview of what we talked about. We progressed from the main ideas behind deception and facial expression, such as the inhibition hypothesis, to rapid judgment assessments, to the categorization of facial expressions, and finally to the computer-based system for analyzing facial expressions in near real time. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the year.